you so much for joining us for part 2 of Courageous Conversations on the future of work and well-being. I'm Stacey Connaughton, the director of the Purdue Policy Research Institute and professor in the Brian Lamb School of Communication here at Purdue. And I'm joined today by Dr. Ashima Krishna, PPRI's associate director, and Krista Kelly, our operations manager. PPRI and the Susan Bulkley Butler Center for Leadership Excellence have teamed up to host a 2-part series called Courageous Conversations. My colleague and dear friend, Dr. Mangala Subramaniam, led part 1 a week ago today. And gosh, last week we covered a lot of ground. We talked about the mental health epidemic, loss of connectedness through technology, the lack of access to equitable resources, and challenges in being able to meet the demands of a global market. Today, we'll build on those ideas and consider policies, our future workforce, and well-being. In just a moment, Provost Jay Akridge will introduce Indiana's first Secretary for Career Connections and Talent, Secretary Blair Milo, who will provide us with opening remarks. If you have any questions for Secretary Milo, please put them in the chat, as she will be able to take a few questions. Then our panelists will speak to the future of work and well-being from their expertise. From there, we'll break into some guided small group discussions for about 15 to 20 minutes, come back together to compare notes and gain additional feedback from our expert panel. Our panelists will share some final thoughts and we'll wrap up the session with some next steps. Before I turn things over to Provost Akridge, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's panel. You have seen their bios, and so just let me say, they are all doers. They live and breathe research and action around the future of work and well-being. Claudia Cummings is the president and CEO of the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance, one of the largest statewide networks in the country, created to boost philanthropy's impact in communities throughout its state borders. She has been steeped in service to the state of Indiana, its communities, and its people. She leads across sectors, serving on various boards, including the Goodwill Education Initiative and the State Workforce Innovation Council. Gary Bertolini, as you all know, is the Dean of the Purdue Polytechnic Institute and a distinguished professor of computer graphics technology and computer and information technology here at Purdue. He co-founded the Indiana Next Generation Manufacturing Competitiveness Center, as we call it INMAC, as well as the Polytechnic Institute initiative at Purdue. Gary is the lead for the Purdue Polytechnic Indianapolis High School that opened in fall 2017. And last, but certainly not least, our dear colleague from Florida State University, Dr. Joe Grzywacz, who is the Associate Dean and the Nora Jane Hendrickson Professor in the College of Human Sciences at FSU. His life's work has been dedicated to eliminating social injustices borne by adults in poverty. And he specifically looks at the everyday work and family experiences of adults and how those experiences contribute to poor health for adults and children. I am now absolutely delighted to introduce our provost, Dr. Jay Akridge, Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Diversity and Provost. As many of you know, prior to his current position, Dr. Akridge served for nearly 9 years as Purdue's Dean of Agriculture. And he also held a number of other positions at Purdue, including Interim Vice Provost for Engagement, Professor of Agricultural Economics, and graduate student. He earned his master's and his PhD right here at Purdue. Please help me welcome Provost Akridge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Connaughton. And I really appreciate being invited to be part of this courageous conversation about the future of work and well-being. And I want to offer my welcome to everyone that's joined us today on behalf of the Office of the Provost. You know, as you mentioned, it's just such a timely and meaningful conversation, an important discussion given the workplace challenges that have been created by COVID-19 and the racial unrest and violence that have really rocked our nation. And I don't need to tell any of this audience about the tremendous stresses these challenges have placed on an already difficult work-life balance. And I think you dealt with some of those in the first Courageous Conversations event. But as the lines of work, the lines between work and home blur or disappear, the challenges of childcare and elder care and other personal issues become more complex, and equity in academic service loads and expectations is a major concern among many other issues as we think about the workplace of the future. And I do believe that given all of this, I think most everyone is thinking about what the future of work looks like after the pandemic. You know, how will, where, and how we work be redefined after all that we've been forced to experience over the past 18 months? And maybe perhaps even more importantly, you know, have we learned some useful lessons that may help us address some of those challenges that I just referenced and that this event talked about during the first session? We're just at an important time as we think about the future of work, and I think courageous conversations like this one can help us define our best possible future. And I certainly want to thank Dr. Stacey Connaughton, Director of the Purdue Policy Research Institute, and Dr. Mangala Subramaniam, Chair and Director of the Butler Center, for their collaboration and leadership on this two-part series. I also want to thank Ann Hazlett, Purdue's Senior Director of Government Relations and Public Affairs, for helping to arrange our very distinguished speaker to join us today. So now it's my great honor and privilege to introduce Secretary Blair Milo to you. Secretary Milo is our state of Indiana's first Secretary for Career Connections and Talent, and was appointed to the role by Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb in 2017. Secretary Milo also serves as the state's Chief Talent Officer. That's a tall order, as Indiana has an estimated 1 million job openings to fill over the next decade. She also serves on the governor's Workforce Cabinet, a body dedicated to shaping education and workforce training for the 21st century workforce. And that's certainly a group that we at Purdue want to be fully engaged with. Prior to her current position, Secretary Milo was twice elected as the mayor of LaPorte, Indiana, her hometown, helping to create more than 1,100 new jobs and securing more than $260 million in new investments during her terms as mayor. Before that, Secretary Milo served 13 years as a surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy, completing 2 Persian Gulf deployments aboard the USS Mason, a third to Bahrain and Iraq on the staff of Destroy Squadron 50, and completing her active duty service at the Pentagon. I know you will all join me in thanking her for her service to our country. And I believe if there's a theme running through Secretary Milo's career, it would be service. First in our armed forces and now in the public sector. And I'm humbled by and have so much respect for that spirit of service that she has embraced throughout her career. And I'd like to think maybe we had just a little bit to do with that, because Secretary Milo has one more accomplishment of note. She is a Boilermaker and graduated from Purdue with a degree in political science before completing her master's degree in legislative affairs from George Washington University. And I can assure you, we couldn't be any prouder to welcome you back home to Purdue, Madam Secretary. So it's my distinct pleasure to turn the virtual podium over to you. Please join me in welcoming Indiana Secretary for Career Connections and Talent, Blair Milo.
Well, thank you so much, Provost Akridge. It is such a delight for me to be able to join so many colleagues that I think share that commitment to service and commitment to all the others who have helped pave the way for us. And just as you mentioned, Purdue was a huge part of opening doors for me and opening my mind to different possibilities and opportunities. And so for the opportunity for me to come back and be a part of continuing that tradition is just a special gift to me today as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to join everyone here today. And I'm so thankful for the leadership that you're offering in these conversations around the future of work. And you know, as I have the opportunity to join many individuals on conversations around this theme of the future of work, so much of it focuses on looking at the different types of industry transitions that we see happening, particularly as a result of the technology that is emerging at a rate faster than we've ever seen before, and particularly in conversations with other colleagues at Purdue and in the colleges, the Polytechnic area, of all of the different types of engineering capabilities coming forward, the computer science aspects of things, and so many elements that are coming in that the more specific skill set area. But I think that it is just as critical for us to be having these conversations around, how are people connecting with that technology? How are people connecting with the different types of career opportunities? And how are we ensuring that we're helping them be successful in all of these endeavors, and recognizing the unique gifts and talents that everyone brings to the different types of career opportunities, and really helping uplift them to be able to have individual success that begets collective team success and community success and state success overall. And so this conversation around well-being as a part of the future of work is so critical, particularly as the Provost just mentioned, and that Dr. Connaughton talked about previously as well, of addressing some of the experiences that we've had over the past past year or so, in tandem with understanding some of these different sort of technical components that have been emerging at faster and faster rates. And that's been a trend that's been ongoing for a number of years now. And so with all of that, you see, I think, individual impacts, and certainly we've seen individual trauma that folks have experienced. But what we've also seen across this last year has really been, I think, a collective sense of trauma. And in many ways, that's been an opportunity for us to be able to connect with one another in different kinds of ways, whether it is through utilizing technology in capacities that we may not have been used to. I know my family has adopted a Sunday tradition that we all get on Zoom to be able to connect up with one another, and we're in different parts across the country, and that has been such a gift for us to be able to do some of those things that we didn't do prior to the pandemic. And so we've been able to connect more than we did prior to some of the challenges that have emerged. And I think that there have been any number of individuals that have found similar types of opportunities, but that still doesn't replace that human to human interaction that we are so wired for in so many different capacities. And so as we're now emerging from this collective experience, and then the individual pieces that we've had along the way of the traumas that we've experienced in any number of capacities, whether it's with the unrest that has evolved, or pieces that have been contributors towards the unrest for many, many years leading up to it, whether it's been health conditions that have become exacerbated because of a pandemic that we have all experienced, then there is a growing need, I think, particularly for leaders and any capacity in industry, in education, in our communities, to lead with empathy and with perspective. And anyone who may be fans of Simon Sinek may have heard some of these terms before, because I think that these are aspects that he has really hit on of recognizing the importance of leaders to be able to best serve those who are in their charge. And he makes a distinction around leaders being people who are oftentimes, we focus on being in charge rather than thinking about the people who are in our charge, and really trying to emphasize the latter. And it reminds me of a philosophy that one of my early mentors, and can still mentor to this day, who was my first captain aboard the USS Mason, and he's still active duty, is actually now put on a 3rd star with the Navy. And he would talk about how things are managed, but people are led. And when we think about leadership and understanding what's being asked of us as neighbors in this moment, but also as leaders, of really being able to serve those whom are in our charge with empathy and perspective, and that empathy being so critical now because everybody has had their own journey that has been informed by different pieces of trauma, as well as a collective experience that we as a world really have endured over the last year, but also have had an opportunity to grow from. And so now as we think about the future of work, and I see all of it truly as opportunity moving forward, we have these incredible emerging technologies that are coming forward that actually are creating different access points for individuals. And so, we just had a conversation earlier this week that I've been involved with the Indy Autonomous Challenge. That's going to be a first of its kind race where you have autonomous Indy cars at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway competing against one another to demonstrate emerging technologies in autonomous vehicles. And what I've been learning through this process is that while this is being showcased in this particular application of motorsports, the technology really applies to advanced manufacturing, to ag biosciences, to the health and life sciences, to different types of equipment that are being used in commercial and residential building trades. And so things like artificial intelligence and different sensors that are utilized, we have all this kind of emerging technology. And if we take this opportunity to acknowledge what that's going to mean, what's the impact for those who are interacting with that technology, and couple that with much more intentionality around the moments that we've been in and the opportunities that we have to move forward, to lead with empathy, to lead with perspective on what some of the fears may be that people are facing, but also encouraging that the excitement and an acknowledgement of where we can go from here. Then I think that there is so much more opportunity for us moving forward. And as I started out, so much of that was cultivated for me with the tremendous leaders I had the opportunity to learn from at Purdue, and that I have the chance to learn from continuing today. Many of the panelists that you're going to hear from today are people that I have the great blessing to be able to serve and learn and lead with. And so I am just deeply thankful for the opportunity to share my enthusiasm for your conversation here today, for your diligence in digging into this really important conversation as we look at the opportunities for Indiana and the US and the world moving forward. And I am happy to take any questions that folks may have in the chat. I've been trying not to read it while I was sharing, but I will flip over here to then see if there are different pieces here that I can address. And so Shelley talks about rethinking work and emphasizing some of the disparities in our workforce. What are Indiana's plans for addressing these disparities as we come out of the pandemic? I think the governor has been very open about addressing some of the disparity that we've seen across the state and trying to acknowledge the work that we have ahead of us in a wide variety of capacities. One of his first steps following an address he gave last August was in being able to appoint the first Chief Equity Inclusion Opportunity Officer, Kara Herring. And it has been a treat really to learn with her. And I am so inspired by her on a daily basis. That she was just talking about, when we think about equity and inclusion, oftentimes we tend to think towards race, ethnicity, and some of the gender pieces, which are all very important. And she's careful to say we also have to think about different components from an equity perspective of different abilities that individuals may have, some intellectual or physical abilities that people may have. And I think to your point, Shelley, acknowledging the different lived experiences that individuals may be coming to the workforce with, and trying to be able to lead with that empathy and perspective, understands the needs that people have for things like healthcare, sick leave. And I'm encouraged by the conversations that are continuing to emerge around the importance of these kinds of opportunities, these kinds of services that are needed, and to be able to see how that can continue to grow, and to have people-centered leaders who are focused on what the needs of their employee base may be, as a part of understanding the full business model that they have moving forward. And I've seen tremendous growth and ongoing growth that is happening amongst our private sector, and in conversation with some of our policy leaders as well.
Thank you very much for that answer. I just wanted to say thank you for your service. I direct the Military Family Research Institute here, and we've met before. I just wanted to say it's nice to see you again, and thank you for your service.
Absolutely. And I'm going to respond to the rest in chat, because I think that we've got so many things coming forward with the panel here moving forward. So thanks for that question. And thank you to others that may post in here, and look forward to getting to listen in on some of the further conversation.
Secretary Milo, thank you so very much. And it's so wonderful to have you back here at Purdue, albeit virtually, at your alma mater. And I join both Shelley and Provost Akridge in thanking you for your service to our nation and our state. Wonderful to have you with us today. I'm delighted now to turn things over to Claudia Cummings, who, as I mentioned before, is the Executive Director of the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance. And she'll begin our panel conversation. Claudia.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stacey. It's great to be here. I told the folks in the pre-panel conversation that, yes, I'm an IU alum, but I think I'm doing okay despite that fact. So hopefully you guys will give me some grace as worthy with this Purdue crowd. But it's great to be here with you guys. That was a joke, by the way. It's hard to know when you're in Zoom, but okay. So it's great to be here with you guys today. I wanted to just kind of start out by giving you a little bit of my background. For over 11 years, I was deeply engaged in workforce and education initiatives through a statewide organization called Connexus Indiana, where I was one of the executive leaders, and I was the one charged with building the advanced manufacturing and logistics workforce necessary to really fuel the Indiana economy. I don't know if you guys know this, but Indiana is the most manufacturing intensive state in the union, which means we rely heavily on those revenues and those jobs to keep our economy pumping. And strangely, this was a stat I always used to like to say at Connexus, and I can't quite remember the number, but we're something like the 13th largest port utilizer or port traffic in the country. And when you think about it, even just the original 13 colonies, there's way more coastal states, but because of our unique positioning along the Ohio River and the Great Lakes, it gives us a lot of capacity, which makes, in combination with our manufacturing strength, Indiana really a prime driver of technological advances with regard to the workforce. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with some of those advances. We are experiencing what they call Industry 4.0. And for those of you who may not be familiar, it's reference to the fourth industrial revolution. And the first three kind of got us from hand tools to machinery, through connectivity, like through telegraphs and rail, and all the way up to what we think of as our digital experience now, how we utilize computing. What's different about the fourth industrial revolution, or Industry 4.0, is this unbelievable interconnectedness that we have through information. So if you think of things like AI or big data, the Internet of Things, these are all everywhere that we look today. And what does that mean for the future of work? These are not just trends that are happening in manufacturing. You can think about autonomous autonomous vehicles like Blair had alluded to with the Speedway, but think about that on larger scale. Think about double or triple tandem semis roaring up and down I-65. We're not far from that. Those are already being utilized out on the road in test capacity, but pretty much ready to go. And so that brings to mind greater opportunity to bring goods to market, less expensive, but also a huge disruption in an industry, the trucking industry and transportation industry, for example. How do we view these transformations and these disruptions, and how do we seize the opportunities that are created by them rather than being kind of pummeled by them in terms of our workforce and the opportunities for our citizens? When you think of this application in COVID, you might remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a huge shortage for PPE. And everyone I know with a 3D printer at universities, in hospitals, at manufacturers, they were printing out face shields and other important devices to make sure that that PPE was out on the floor in the hospitals where it needed to be. A huge opportunity for us to utilize some of that Industry 4.0 technology and 3D printing to make us be able to adapt so fast on a dime to the pandemic challenges. Even our pavement, the roads that we drive on, are impacted by this fourth industrial revolution. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the fact that there are sensors in our highways. They tell INDOT when the roads are freezing. They help folks know how quickly the traffic is going. It feeds census data on commuting patterns. All kinds of data is being gathered every time we enter a highway here in Indiana. So these, again, every industry is being impacted. I also have been thinking about another utilization where it's thought of is as we're coming back to work and folks are looking to make sure that they are in a healthy, clean air environment, and the opportunity to use data and AI to determine when ventilation needs to be turned up and turned down, and those fancy laser cleaners that we have here in our office building when we enter, all of those are technological advances. So I just wanted to kind of sit everyone as we're going into this conversation with, at the same time we're coming out of this pandemic, we're also riding what's called the digital tsunami. There's so much change that was already happening prior to the pandemic, and now it's just going to accelerate. Prior to the pandemic, we knew that 74% of manufacturing firms were planning on increasing their adoption of automation. We knew that 1 in 10 jobs that's planned to exist in 2030 did not exist in 2019 even, pre-pandemic. So think of that, 10% of all jobs will be different from what we know. A third of those jobs are going to require skills that are not common today, things that are required that we can't even anticipate for 10 years from now. That's how quickly we are evolving. And with COVID-19, we saw all those trends just go even faster. 25% of advanced manufacturers fast-track their automation programs to stem the worker shortages that have been created. And I just said something that's a kind of an oxymoron if you think about common conversations, and that is there are worker shortages. Those worker shortages are in places that are highly technical. So with this transition that we're seeing in the workplace, we're also seeing an increase in need for highly skilled individuals. But the skill is different from what we think of from 20 years ago. It's not necessarily that everyone needs their bright, shiny, newly minted Purdue University degree. Sometimes I'm sure Dean Bertolini is going to talk about some of the middle skill credentials that Purdue is engaged in. High school opportunities like at the Polytechnic, where we can get folks skilled up while they're still engaged in our secondary education system. One of our members, Fairbanks Foundation, has been deeply engaged in working on apprenticeships, again, to bring some of those technical skills down lower into the mass workforce to ensure that everyone has opportunities to become skilled in these jobs that are evolving. If we don't evolve, we're going to have folks that are left behind. And as we're talking about courageous conversations, I thought I would, in the spirit of this, throw like kind of a hot potato out into the group and pause for a moment to think about this. A lot of us are spending time debating the minimum wage. You know, that's a really big topic right now. And folks need to have a family sustaining wage. It's absolutely critical. But while we're debating that on one side, what's happening is those minimum wage service worker jobs that exist now that might fall below that $15 an hour, those are dying off. What's happening really is we have this avalanche of jobs that are coming and the evolution of skills that are needed in existing jobs. And we need to really have our eye on that ball to ensure that folks don't fall further behind as we talk about equity. We don't want to create even greater inequity by not ensuring that everyone is ready for those significant changes. So I'm going to pause or stop here and let the conversation continue, but I'm looking forward to hearing what else folks have to share. And I just appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Claudia, thank you so much. Your comments were so rich with insights and so many questions, right, for us to continue to work on addressing together. Really, really appreciate it. I'm pleased now to turn to Gary to continue our conversation.
Thank you, Stacey. Claudia, a great segue. I have some similar thoughts. And so we should talk offline sometime. We think a lot alike, but I'm going to also bring in a few other things. So there's a lot that I could talk about. I'm going to try really hard to summarize because this is not a 10-minute issue, okay? This is something that is very profound, and it goes back to what Claudia had said earlier. We are in a changed world. And if you don't understand that, this idea that we have an industry 4.0, this is absolutely world shaking, because for the first time in humanity's existence, the machines are smarter than the humans. And so we have to figure out how to prepare graduates for that kind of world. Knowing things and stuff is not enough. Skill sets that revolve around creativity and teamwork and gaining insight to the artificial intelligence outputs that we have, that's going to separate those that are successful from those that aren't. The lifespan is rapidly increasing, although obviously with the pandemic, it's this little blip. We'll get past this, but the lifespans are increasing. So the length of time the person works is going to be much longer. And we have to start thinking about that. And so it's not a matter of preparing graduates for changing jobs. It's literally changing their profession. And how do we prepare them for that? We talk about how do you prepare graduates for jobs that don't exist? Because that's literally what we're doing. They're being invented right in front of our eyes, and it is constantly changing. We have to talk about something that I've run across recently. Is called skill-based hiring. There's up to 30 million people in the United States without college degrees that have the skills with just some very small amount of additional training that could earn 70% more than they're earning right now. There are 30 million, okay? And so we have to think about and rethink who is skilled and how skills are measured and evaluated. We have this credit hour constraint that's over 100 years old, and financial aid is attached to it. And it's very difficult to change and try and break this ridiculous thing of seat time equals learning, when we know that's not what happens, okay? And we also need to think about competency-based education to replace the credit hour, especially when we get into skill-based hiring. And for many jobs, it needs to be based on their skills rather than their degree. And you know, you might find someone that's been in higher ed most of their adult life to say something like that, but it's not one size fits all. And that's what I'm starting to discover with this industrial age 4.0 that we're going through. The highest paid workers without college degrees include areas with computing, highly technical, and some management kinds of jobs. And you do not necessarily need a college education for those. You're seeing that with companies like Google. They are not actually requiring a college education. They simply want to know what you can do in the areas that they need. There's an example of the study that I was looking at where an office administrative assistant got a portal to a better job by taking a few nights courses. And it really ended up having 70% higher wage, very, very easily transitioning in. In many cases, you can do this within your own company. You just have to recognize talent, a person that has initiative, and they have a few foundational skills and they're willing to learn, and you need to start working with them. So part of this is, yeah, government can play a role, but so does the private sector. We all need to alter our perceptions on hiring habits and career development programs to increase opportunities for workers without college degrees and workers that are in place, and seeing what we can do to value them and move them forward. We also have some other challenges. There's a huge bottleneck right now that we have in our society. 74% of new jobs in the US, employers frequently require 4-year degrees, but this hurdle excludes roughly 2/3 of US workers. And in many cases, you actually don't need a 4-year degree. It's just that we put in these arbitrary hurdles, and it's really badly affecting our ability to fill some of these positions. And this is the other thing, this hurdle that excludes roughly 2/3 of US workers, it's most pronounced on minorities. So it eliminates 76% of the Black workforce and 83% of the Latino workforce. And that is something that we really need to address because of this bottleneck, but we can address it through this idea of skill-based hiring. And then we have this digital blind spot. And this goes back to kind of the digital tsunami that Claudia mentioned. It's this blind spot that we have that, you know, we need to add digital skills to our education system, whether that's K through 12 or higher ed. These are the new foundations that build off of the traditional foundations of math and writing and reading, right? We just have to build on that, and that's how we avoid this digital blind spot. And so we need to talk about digital literacy that enable digital resilience by providing workers with their foundational skills and confidence to tackle new technologies. And it provides, and we need to really come up with what is the framework for that. And then finally, there's one last one. It's called the turnover tsunami. That before the pandemic, on average, we'd have over 3 million jobs a month where people would move to another job. During the pandemic, that number dropped to about 1 million. There's going to be a huge pent-up demand of workers that want to leave, okay? They want to improve their pay. They want a better work-life balance. They want to do something that really challenges them, where they've been sitting in place because they're afraid to lose the job they have right now. And especially if the economy picks up, and what Washington is doing to try and make sure the economy goes forward, there's going to be a huge pent-up demand for a workforce. But don't forget, a lot of people will want to leave their current job and move into something else. So there's going to be a huge amount of churn that you have to factor in to everything else. And then finally, I'm teaching a course right now that's titled Living with Purpose and Thriving. What I'm trying to do is prepare our graduates for what it's like to be an adult, okay? And there's only 3 things that bring happiness, okay, in broad terms, all right? Your purpose in life. Well, guess what? For most people, their purpose in life is wrapped around their job. And so we have to really start thinking about how important a job is to a human, okay? The second one is their health. And this is both mental, physical, and spiritual. And so, you know, the mental health is being challenged because of the way we're working right now. Obviously, even the physical, if you sit in front of a Zoom meeting all day, you lose some of just the interactions you have of walking down the hall and visiting someone in the office. And then finally, your relationships. Relationships are breaking down because we're doing so much virtually. And so there's a huge piece of people's happiness that's wrapped up all around what we're talking about today. And so whatever we do going forward, when we talk about workforce, we need to factor in those three big factors and see if we can better prepare graduates to addressing those and understanding why they aren't feeling good one day because they haven't interacted with anyone other than virtually. And so raising awareness on that side of it. And so those are some of the thoughts that I have related to this topic. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so very much. Wonderful additional
I think
insights.
you're muted, Stacey, maybe.
Yes, fantastic. Fantastic conversations and additional kernels to keep our conversation going. Thank you so very much. And now it's my great pleasure to reintroduce someone who is, as I just learned, is fondly known as Professor G. Joe G. from Florida State University. Joe, welcome to Purdue, or welcome back to Purdue, I should say.
Well, thanks very much, and I'm afraid I'll warn everybody right off the bat that I'm gonna break the mold a little bit. I've been told before that I'm a maverick, and so I guess this is yet another example of it. So I'm gonna intersperse my comments with a visual metaphor for what I think holds this thing together. And I want to begin with, just a few moments that these white dominoes really sort of reflect the idea that there's this monolithic idea that work is generally a good thing, right? We generally tend to view things about aspects of work and employment in a very positive way, not only at the individual, but at the macro level, right? The fundamentals of basic economics requires individuals to convert raw materials or transform raw materials into consumable products in some way, shape, or form for building an economy. And then correspondingly, at the individual level, there's all sorts of information out there that suggests that individuals who are employed generally tend to have better physical and mental health than the individuals who are not employed. And so this creates this idea that by and large, work is a good thing. It's a universal good thing, not only for society, but also for individuals. But then as we watch this chain of events unfold, we start to see a little bit of information that starts to make us go, but wait a minute, jobs are complex, right? And the complexity is intended to be illustrated in these different colors of the dominoes that are represented here. And that complexity can take a variety of different shapes and sizes, some of which we've heard of today. Right, so we've heard about the digital tsunami, right? So the vast amount of new jobs that are likely going to be coming on the market that are going to be virtually related. We've heard some about the gig economy, about no longer is there a structure that underlies the job, but each person kind of creates their own job in their own way in the world. Of course, there's always going to be the bread and butter things of education and social services and hospitality. But the point being is that jobs are complex in a variety of different ways. Some of them are structural, and that structure has both a physical structure that goes along with it, right? Do you actually have a workplace? If you do have a workplace, what are the elements of that workplace? Is it a high-rise tower that has a common ventilation system? Is it a slaughterhouse that somebody might work in? Is it a field that a farm worker might find themselves in? So the physical structure of work is very different. The temporal structure of work is very different. And we can think of it in the classic temporal way of, well, is it full-time or part-time? Is it a permanent job, or is it sort of, I'm hopping from one thing to the next, like a gig economy? But then we can also think about other aspects of temporality, like what time of day do you work? The World Health Organization classifies night shift work as a class 3 carcinogen. So, some aspects about when people work is as important as whether or not people are working. And then, of course, there's all of the different activities that we encounter while on the job. Are we acquiring skills, or are we just basically being treated like a human machine? What opportunities are there for individuals? What opportunities are made possible through jobs? And so I use all of those ideas with the metaphor of these different color dominoes to say, yes, work by and large is thought of as a universal good, but whether or not we should think about work and employment as a universal good probably requires a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. And that then continues then with the idea that, work is by and large viewed as having beneficial effects for health and well-being. And that's what's reflected in these dominoes that are falling down here. And as you can imagine, that health and well-being is really complex, right? Given all the complexity of the work, well, how do we start thinking about the implications of the temporal structure of jobs and different job structures for the health and well-being of the workforce? As I've already pointed out, the World Health Organization classifies night shift work and rotating shift work as a class 3 or carcinogen. So do we really want to grow more of those kinds of work arrangements? Or conversely, there's a well-established literature with meta-analyses that are indicating that precarious work, that is, jobs that don't have an underlying employment contract that go along with them, that those individuals also tend to have poor health and well-being outcomes. And so what are the actual health-related implications of a gig economy? The classic theoretical model that links health and well-being comes from Marie Jahoda in the early 80s. And she outlined a variety of key mechanisms that say, work is fundamentally related to health in at least 5 different ways. But one of those is that it gives people an opportunity for social contact. Well, in the digital tsunami, if we start breaking that element of the workforce, then will we yield the health-related benefits for workers of that employment contract? Clearly, society is going to get its productivity elements out of it, and so therefore the economy will continue to survive and thrive, but whether or not the individual health and well-being of workers doing those jobs is going to survive and thrive is yet a very different question. And what goes along with that then is fundamentally the idea that, yeah, by and large, health it's got a strong link and connection to the work that we do and the kind of work that we do. And sometimes those connections are positive, right? We know that there's certain attributes of jobs that are associated with better health outcomes. People who are able to make their own decisions on the job tend to have better outcomes, including cognitive function later into life. Individuals that have the opportunity to make some decisions over their schedules about when they're going to work and how they're going to work. And part of that work-family balance kind of question that I understand came up last time, that those individuals tend to have better physical health-related outcomes, in part because they've got better lifestyles that they're able to practice. They're more likely to engage in physical activity, less likely to smoke, and things of that variety. And again, there's a myriad of other attributes of jobs that are made possible that do have possible beneficial effects. But there's also elements of jobs that, in addition to having some positive effects, can also knock health down. And here especially is where we start running into the elements of how policies and decisions, economic decisions about jobs, can sometimes be working at cross purposes with the health and well-being of individual workers. Some of you know that I do a fair amount of work. Almost the entirety of my research program is focused on the immigrant population, oftentimes in very marginalized parts of the labor force. So think agriculture, think construction, especially small scale residential construction, think poultry processing, right? Somebody's got to kill all those chickens that our healthy diet wants us to have. Somebody has to harvest all those delicate hand vegetables that we like to pick up in our high profile Trader Joe's and other places where we get our organic foods from. Somebody's got to harvest and do all that work to bring the work to the table. And those individuals are oftentimes harvesting or working under the least protections that are available to individuals, in part because that brings costs down for the production. And so there's nothing quite like the manufacturing sector and the poultry processing sector or the agricultural sector to show where things help the economy. Those beneficial things for the economy are borne on the back of somebody somewhere who has to do that work. at the end of the day, until we're willing to pay a living wage for the people who are taking care of our kids, and we still require daycare providers to have a master's degree so that they can be in those high quality childcare centers, how are we going to help those highly trained, necessary professionals raise their own children and their own families? And so there are elements, especially in the domains of the service sector and service work, where the value of the commodity that's being produced is not matched by the value of the service that they're providing to the overarching economy. Likewise, in the domains of agriculture, likewise in the domains of construction and poultry processing. And so the point that I want to make with this overarching metaphor as we watch the rest of it go is the interconnections between employment, health, well-being, and where jobs are going are exceedingly complex. Sometimes it creates what appears to be something that's beneficial and beautiful, like this rainbow that's unfolding around us. But sometimes it also brings things crashing down, hopefully, without anticipation, knowing that it's going to come crashing down, because I like to believe that nobody deliberately wants to bring individuals or people groups down. But it's those very same people groups who are on the margins who are oftentimes overlooked in policy discussions. Because at the end of the day, the more we want fruits and vegetables on the table, especially those that look good, that don't have that greenhouse taste to them, the more we need people who are picking vegetables out of fields that need to be cultivated by hand and need to be picked by hand. The more we think that we need to take advantage of digital technologies, the more we're going to have people working alone, and the systems that are in place that help people get trained for those jobs are going to systematically not look at individuals who aren't usually in those jobs. And so at the end of the day, this metaphor ends, and now here's where it's going to get a little bit of hiccupy, so hold tight. At the end of the day, this metaphor really ends with three main talking points that I'd have people consider with regard to as we head into our courageous conversation. And courageous conversation number one is that if you're going to speak eloquently and thoughtfully about the interconnections between work and well-being and the future of work and well-being, we have to remember that work is complex. We can't just think about it in terms of employed, unemployed. If we've got low unemployment rates, we're doing great. But if we've got high unemployment rates, we're doing bad. No, we need to be thinking more about it in terms of whether or not we've got a low unemployment rate and a high employment rate in good jobs. And good jobs means at least being attentive to the pay structure that individuals have. In my college, and we have metrics here at Florida State University, and the graduates that we produce in our college who go on and take care of kids in child care centers or take care of kids through social service agencies, they don't even count for some metrics because they usually make less than $30,000 a year. And so therefore, we need to recognize that there's value in that work, even if people don't necessarily want to pay for it in the marketplace, because until we come up with a solution for who's going to care for the kids, who's going to pick up, who's going to pick up the trash, who's going to be cleaning the hallways, all the work that we tend to overlook when we think about the future of work, that work needs to be done. And so therefore, there needs to be a livable wage. And so I use those as examples to say we have to attend to the complexities of what work and employment means. Next, and I know Shelley's going to love this, context, context, context. The effects of work on well-being are always context specific. All of the meta-analyses that have been done on the interrelationships between work and well-being make it very clear. Some people have survived and thrived through the Great Recession and the COVID pandemic, whereas other people have been put back on their heels in a dramatic way. And usually it's the individuals who are on the margins of the economy that are most vulnerable. And so therefore, any policy decision has to be attentive to the fact that sort of the 80-20 rule. Yes, this might work for 80% of the people, but the 20% of the individuals who it's not benefiting are probably exacting the greatest cost. So therefore, how can we be attentive to context in terms of designing policy-related solutions as it pertains to the future of work? And then last but not least, we have to be attentive to the reality that policy discussions about work and well-being often have inherent biases that recreate systems of inequality. The very protections that are put in place for groups of people. I mean, Shelley and I, again, were there when we did the White House Forum on workplace flexibility, but who by and large benefits from those initiatives? It's not the hourly workers, because the hourly workers frequently have to show up and do a task someplace. And so at the end of the day, the White House Forum on workplace flexibility, as an example, back in 2006, whatever it was, that forum was fundamentally, trying to help a relatively advantaged group of people. They need help, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it was irrelevant, but it just provides a nice concrete example of how policy and policy initiatives oftentimes have inherent biases that if we're not attentive to those, that we will just simply recreate the systems of oppression and inequality that we're currently trying to address through courageous conversations like this today. And that is where I'll leave my thoughts and ideas, and I'll look forward to seeing where the conversations go.
Wow, Dr. Grzywacz, thank you so very much, and many thanks truly to each of our panelists and to Secretary Milo for kicking us off and getting us ready for these conversations.